Reading Summary of 10 Guys You Should Know by Ian J. Maddock. The chapter on Anselm of Canterbury. Anselm of Canterbury is memorialized as one of the statues that stand outside the Canterbury Cathedral. He is a notable churchman and theologian during the 11th century, as well as the father of scholasticism. He's made various other contributions toward church-state relations on the international stage and the scholarly life of Christianity during his time. His appearance outside the Canterbury Cathedral is both unexpected, given that he was not even English. He was born in Italy, and neither was he willing as well, since he did not aspire to high ecclesiastical office. Quite the opposite, Anselm initially aspired to a quiet life in a monastery. Instead, he wound up in public church life, managing and navigating treacherous and complex church-state relations on an international level. His journey traversed across continental Europe to England, and then he shuttled back and forth between England and Italy as well during the period of some of his exiles. So Anselm, although aspiring to a quiet life, had early on showed a lot of potential to sort of rise up within the church ranks, which he did, making it to in fact to be the Archbishop of Canterbury in his final office. In the following, we shall trace the chronology of his life, beginning with his birth in Aosta, northern Italy, and his journey towards the monastery in Bec in Normandy, leading up to his sort of succession into the role of Archbishop of Canterbury, taking him right to England itself. As we can begin to note, he was born around 1033 in northern Italy, Aosta. Despite being drawn to the secluded life of the monastery from an early age, he was resisted by his father, since parental consent was required for children of young age, to be admitted into the abbey. After his mother's death in 1056, that was when he was mature enough. So in 1056, he left home in search of a new life, in search of a new phase of his life. He was seeking spiritual and intellectual stimulation. In 1059, he arrived in Bec, Normandy, and admitted himself into a Benedictine monastery. He was quickly drawn to the renowned scholar Lanfranc, who would be who would someday become the Archbishop of Canterbury and his predecessor in that role. In 1060, he fulfilled his dream of becoming a monk. And early on, he had been identified as one of great potential, quickly became Lanfranc's protege, known as a precociously talented budding scholar, but also for his personal holiness. Anselm would go on to become the first great theologian of the Middle Ages. And he would also become known as the intellectual father of scholasticism, an approach that of theology that places a heavy emphasis on faith-driven reason. So it's considered groundbreaking during his time, since he was one of the pioneers of people who used such a radical approach, which was considered departure from tradition, a departure from conventional theology. We continue to trace the timeline. So here we see that in 1063, um, Anselm stood out as Lanfranc's obvious successor as prior. So when Lanfranc was promoted to become an abbot of another cathedral, Anselm became an obvious choice to be his successor as prior in Bec. So in 1063, that was when succeeded from as Bec's prior. So in fact, he was a very reluctant statesperson or a church person who was promoted again and again. The promotion sought after him. He unsuccessfully avoided institutional leadership, which would continuously become a defining feature of Anselm's life. So this was a repeated pattern in his life, continually promoted against even his own will. One other notable related paradigm of Anselm was this privileging of the spiritual over the material. So Anselm's real aspiration was to retreat into the quiet monastic life where he could continually theologize, continually reflect, continually meditate upon who God is, and to write volumes and volumes of theological works. He was maybe in this sense also kind of a hermit as well. Yet he unavoidably became entrenched into public and ecclesiastical life. So, having assumed the role of prior in 1063, his office will continue for another 15 years, prior of Beck. Yeah, so his role includes teaching theology and mentoring other monks. However, towards the end of his tenure, he managed to commit some key aspects of his lecture to writing, producing two of his three major works during this period of 1063 to 1078. Yeah, that was when two of his three major works produced. And the two major works were Monologion, Monolog, lo, Logion, and Proslogion. We shall delve a little more deeply into these two works later on because they are his seminal works, which contain some really important contribution to scholastic theology and the understanding for the reasonableness of God's existence. And this is related to the point I made in the summary above, where it talks about how he marries faith and reason. So we review in depth the first work, Monologion, which is otherwise entitled An Example of Meditation on the Grounds of Faith. In this book, his goal was to make a case for the reasonableness of God's existence, and it represented theological creativity and innovation, which was frowned upon by tradition during his time. His method was considered something that was unconventional and untraditional and unusual. And this work builds upon Platonist philosophical assumption. Here is included uh, an excerpt from Monologion, which argues for God's supreme goodness. The, the quote above is summarized here. There is an ultimate immaterial good against whom we measure all relative material goodness. So intrinsic goodness that belongs to God Himself is what he's arguing based on philosophical assumption here. So uh, there is some, I'm not sure whether it's inductive or deductive work that's done, or some reasoning that's done to say that since uh, um, there are things that are not intrinsically good that reflect intrinsic goodness, and there is an ultimate supreme goodness that is good on its own, and that ultimate good that is good on its own is none other than God Himself. The second work is Proslogion. Two core ideas are propounded within Proslogion itself. First is the famous idea of faith seeking understanding, or in Latin, fides quaerens intellectum. There he sets the foundation that faith is the necessary precursor or prerequisite in order to understand God. The second core idea that is present within Proslogion is Anselm's ontological argument for God. Essentially, one of the pillars of the ontological argument for God is to think of if it's possible that God exists, then God exists. In addition to that, the ontological argument also argues that if there is he essentially merges or integrates the idea between the best thing that we can think of and the best thing that exists. And God is, by reason, the the best thing that exists and the best thing that we can think of. So if we can think of something that nothing can supersede it, then that thing exists, and then God is that thing that really exists. Yeah, slightly brain fried after that portion, but so that's kind of sums up in a nutshell what the ontological argument is. Let's read on. So here in a nutshell, the essence of Anselm's ontological argument. If God is that than which nothing greater can be thought, that is, God is perfection, he must also necessarily exist. Why? Because if he didn't exist, he wouldn't be perfect. If there was even a possibility of God's non-existence, then his status as that than which nothing greater can be conceived would be fatally compromised. As a reasonable result, only God can be thought of as necessarily existing. It's because it is possible for us to conceive the idea of perfection, uh, therefore, therefore leads us to the conclusion that God can exist and God does exist. This idea is definitely not without criticism. There are, of course, people thinking of hallucinations that people can come up with. The perfect island that doesn't necessarily exist in reality, and people are able to conceive or imagine things that do not exist, or unicorns and all of that. So this idea is not left unchallenged, for sure. One of Anselm's greatest critics during his time was a fellow monk named Galeno. Anselm was prepared to rebut Galeno. However, as he was preparing his uh, response, Beck's abbot had deceased. So that happened in 1078. That position was left in a vacuum. And of course, as we guessed it, he was forced to assume that promotion. 1078 was the year when the abbot of Beck passed away, and Anselm assumed the role of abbot. Because of this new role, Anselm had to travel up to England, and it's because of a recent change in the system or the way things were ran. So some years back in 1066, when William the Conqueror invaded England, he made some of these church leaders become into feudal lords because he began to ascribe significance to Normans in the country. So as a newly minted abbot of the Norman monastery, Anselm suddenly became a feudal lord. It was also it also came to attention that Lanfranc had been also promoted during this time to become Archbishop of Canterbury. And here it mentions that this would prove to be a portentous appointment for Anselm. And the word means, portentous means ominous and foretelling. Ominous in the sense that uh, he could see what was coming. He was about to become the next archbishop after if Lanfranc were to be removed, due to death or whatsoever, which eventually happened, and that was in 1089, which we shall note in our timeline here. He was named to be the succeeding archbishop of Canterbury following Lanfranc's death. Hence that happened, but being very reluctant and whatnot, he stalled for time. So he kept stalling for time until 1093. The king was severely ill, and he was afraid that if he didn't fill the position, he would actually go to hell. Yeah, so he made the crowd and clergy pleasing choice. So to everyone's excitement, elected Anselm and pushed him into this office. So how great was Anselm's reluctance? He was described to be carried against his will to stand before Rufus, even refusing to grasp the episcopal staff that was pressed against his closed fist. So we could see that he refused vehemently against the taking up of this uh, perhaps highest office, in all of England, in England ecclesiastical ranks. Of course, against his will, later in 1093, they successfully installed Anselm of Canterbury to become the next archbishop. What was his main concerns as archbishop? So, reordering church-state relations, making reforms, where he wanted to prevent rulers like William Rufus from intruding upon the spiritual jurisdiction of the church. So it was highly political. The church was by right reporting into the Pope or under papal jurisdiction, and the kings of those days attempted to override that, attempted to seize the power to themselves. However, it was clear that Anselm's prime allegiance was towards the Pope. Pope was always more important to him than the kings. So he had a complicated and a factitious relationship with the kings that resulted in his multiple exiles. With specific two or three of them, for sure, or maybe not to the extent of Athanasius. One of the specific conflicts that was described was William Rufus demanding a large sum of money for a military campaign in Normandy and being refused by uh, Anselm. So he refused because that would burden his tenants. Uh, Anselm was likewise denied by Rufus when he sought permission to visit Rome and to reconnect with the Pope. However, after three requests from Anselm's end, he departed anyway in 1097. So he self-exiled himself, left for Italy against Rufus's order, visited the Pope, uh, and yeah, traveled back to Italy to visit the Pope. Back in Italy, he requested the Pope to relieve him as Archbishop, but the Pope did the opposite and uh, sent him to the Council of Bari to defend the filioque controversy against the Eastern Church. So that took us to 1098, where he went to the council, and after that he did have some respite with a 2-month writing retreat in a small mountain village. It was there where Anselm completed a legacy-defining project and his third seminal work entitled Why God Became Man, Cur Deus Homo. To supplement the timelines on the right-hand side, visited Pope Council of Bari to defend filioque. All right, so as part of Cur Deus Homo, it also captured an extended dialogue between Anselm and one of his monk named Boso. Anselm make the case for the necessity of Jesus's incarnation, and it's linked with the atonement that was groundbreaking during his time. There was a prevailing view called the ransom theory, was also held by Gregory of Nyssa, dating back to the 4th century. And in this theory, we are being held captive by the devil. God offers Jesus as the ransom price for release. So God was negotiating with Satan and using Jesus as the ransom to redeem us. Anselm's satisfaction theory was radically different because it was completely new. It wasn't Satan who was owed something in this theory. It was God. So the onus of sin has been shifted away from the relationship between God and Satan, or the relationship of God against Satan, changed towards now instead God with man. Sin was redescribed as our failure to give proper honor to God, and there was we were required to restore such an honor. But the honor is not something that man can restore. It required God himself to act on our behalf. His views were reminiscent of medieval feudal context, where a restitution of honor was the prevailing way of viewing relationships. He asserts to sin is nothing other than not to give God what is owed to him. Someone who does not render to God this honor due to him is taking away from God what is his and dishonoring God. And this is what it is to sin. The paradigm or the understanding of sin has been rewired, in this satisfaction theory propounded by Anselm. A noteworthy quote here, which I shall read from Anselm, and his question is, "But how do you spare the wicked if you are all just and supremely just, God?" Referring to God. For how does the all just and supremely just one do something that is unjust? Or what kind of justice is it to give everlasting life to him who merits eternal death? How then, O good God, good to the wicked, how do you save the wicked if this is not just, and you do not do anything which is not just? So the highly paradoxical question of how can God give everlasting life, given that his honor has been dishonored by sinful men. Following that line of argument, he offered a number of potential solutions. So Boso asks in response, why can't God simply just forgive and forget when we repent? Which sounds like a reasonable argument. If I confess and I ask for forgiveness, why can't God just overlook the sin? And Anselm famously responds, "You have not yet considered how heavy the weight of sin is." And then Boso asks again, "Or couldn't we just pay the debt ourselves?" Anselm says, "That's impossible. We owe God more than we could ever possibly repay. And besides, it's not simply our lack of ability to pay back the honor we've stolen from God that holds us back. Our sin makes us fundamentally unwilling to honor God as well. It's not just that we cannot pay back, but we also don't want to pay the honor due to God." And some reasons that a God man is required to bring about this atonement. In summary, the satisfaction theory was really considered a game changer during Anselm's time. Fundamentally, it shifted the conversation from a supposed transaction between God and the devil, which is encapsulated in the ransom theory, to something that occurs between humanity and God. The exchange of satisfaction theory makes Jesus a repayment for the honor due to God, lost on our part. And that Jesus became man as such, to provide this satisfaction so that God's justice can be satisfied and he can offer the pardon while not compromising on his justice. This also became the precursor for the reformers to later, in 4 centuries later, to recover penal substitution based on the scriptures. And as Anselm was enjoying his time theologizing as part of this third seminal work, Cur Deus Homo, news came thereafter that of a few deaths. Firstly, Urban II, William II, both died. Rufus was shot by an arrow on a hunting expedition in August 1100. In any case, his younger brother Henry I quickly assumed the throne. The king offered a lure to Anselm by promising to be more deferential toward the authority of the church and the new pope. So to be promised to be less political, but he did not keep his promise. In fact, this king wanted to propose and became part of what history call the English investiture controversy. The English investiture controversy essentially is the king wanting to invest bishops with their spiritual authority. Substantially, what that means is that they wanted to be the one to invest the bishops with their ring and their staff, which are symbols of their office, which is by right the Pope's jurisdiction. See, a king shouldn't be involved in spiritual matters of the spiritual authority. They should only be involved as civil authorities or kingdom matters, and then the spiritual matters should roll up to the Pope instead. So this was where Anselm found himself conflicting with the new king, and shortly thereafter, by this reason, he found himself in another exile once again. And then he was only allowed to safely re-enter England in 1106. Thereafter, next milestone was 1108, where he began an exploration into the thorny relationship between God's sovereignty and our freedom, entitled De Concordia. Anselm was laid to rest in 1109, and his biographer is named Eadmer, and he graciously described how he was buried, laid to rest, in the year 1109, as dawn was breaking on the Wednesday before the institution of the Lord's Supper. Dot dot dot. So he was finally laid to rest at Canterbury Cathedral, but the whereabouts of his body is unknown to us already today. Let me just update on the right-hand side, all these timelines. Okay, we next come to the final summary. Yeah. So, as a whole, Anselm was sort of a product of his religious and cultural context. Yet his legacy has transcended the medieval European context in which contributions were forged. We can definitely learn from Anselm's non-ambitious uh, character, but yet despite his reluctance to assume church office, he always rose to the occasion. He does show what it's like to reconcile both the spiritual and the material between seemingly opposing ideas like faith and reason, applying creative thinking to tradition. A devotional life that one can really aspire towards, both leading a quiet life, life alone in solitude with God, but also life in the public office as well. So, being useful on earth, even as one sets their heart in heaven. Thus, this is a legacy that Anselm has bequeathed to us. That, of course, on top of his various major theological volumes, Monologion, Proslogion, Crudius, Homo, and then De Concordia,